We did it. We're here. Welcome to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 crash course. Today, I think we're all here because we want to learn about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So we're going to go through all of them from top to bottom, and we're going to go over some real life examples of what to look for. So a few of y'all sent me your websites to look at, so I'm going to be looking at those. I'm also going to be looking at my Stretch Break website, which is what have been using to kind of learn more accessible code as I build my own projects. So one of the projects is built with React. The other project that I'm going to show you is built with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The other one's built with Weebly, which is, if you're not familiar with Weebly, it's one of those drag and drop type of websites. So it'll be interesting to see how accessible they are just from just looking. So yeah, that's what we're gonna do today. And I think we're ready to just jump in and get started since we're having a little bit of a late start. So I'm gonna start this slideshow and get ready. So remember, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Another thing we're going to be doing for fun, just to get some practice in, is we're going to be doing alt text for memes that pop up on the screen. So if you want to participate, you can just, whenever you see a meme, try to concisely explain what it is. I like to talk about alternative text or alt text attributes in HTML because it's one of the very easy things that we can all do to kind of be more accessible and more inclusive. And something that people often forget about. I think it's also important to think about alt text in the content that you write when you're writing alt text. In general, we don't want our alt text to be too wordy or too long because that's annoying to hear and read if you're non-sighted or blind and using a screen reader. And you want to make sure that even though I know if you follow me, a lot of my alt text that I use for memes or reaction pictures, they're kind of funny, but while they're funny, they explain what's actually happening. It's not just a joke. So you want to make sure you're actually explaining what's on there too. All right, so let's get started. All right, so this is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, the crash course with me, Africa Kenya. All right, I wanted to just give you a little bit of background about who I am and why I'm talking about this topic. It's my favorite topic to talk about right now. I am an occupational therapist. I transitioned from occupational therapy over to web accessibility after doing a boot camp where I learned full stack web development. I am community taught. A lot of my emphasis is on accessibility because as an occupational therapist, what I was doing was helping people with disabilities use technology via assistive technology, things like screen readers, voice to text, specialized keyboards, specialized different devices to use for people with impairments. And now I am working full-time as an accessibility engineer, working with the government, doing audits to make sure that all digital software and documents and all those kinds of things are accessible. I've been working with people with disabilities since 2010, which is a long time and probably ages myself. Right now, my passions are yoga, web accessibility, and web development. All right, so what is WCAG? So we call it WCAG for short from this moment on, but you all know we're talking about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Clarita Lamechita, hopefully I said that right, asks, when using libraries and frameworks, do you have complete access to the HTML code to be sure if it is semantic? Typically, you should have access to something. Some things aren't written in HTML. They may be written in something else that looks like HTML, but you should in general have access to it. I think the only time you may not have access to HTML would be if you're using a drag and drop like Weebly, but even then, a lot of the times they do have developer tools where you can go in and kind of structure it in some way, but I haven't personally tried that. All right, so the WCAG is created by the W3C, so that's the World Wide Web Consortium. They create the international standards for the web. They've been around since 1994. It's made up of people who are in the accessibility field, disability orgs, different stakeholders, government, and industry workers. This is not a legal requirement, the WCAG specifically. However, because it is so robust and so well known, a lot of governments do use it as a standard that is legally required by law. And that would include, I believe, the European Union, the United States of America, and Canada. They have the WCAG as the foundation of their web accessibility laws. So what it does is it pretty much just gives you an outline, a very, very detailed technical outline. It's very dry, very, very technical, and it pretty much explains how we would make web content more accessible specifically for people with disabilities. So while web accessibility does help us all and impact us all in positive ways, we always want to make sure we are putting kind of recognizing and focusing on people with disabilities for this. All right, so when we talk about content, we're talking about anything on the web page. This would include how the page looks, the information on the page, the images you have, and the sounds that you have on your web page. This also is going to include the code and markup that defines our structure. So the presentation of the page is programmatically structured. But this also is helpful for designers who are not doing anything with their code because a lot of the stuff is very visual. All right, so when it comes to WCAG, we have 3 levels of conformance, and that would be A, AA, and AAA. AAA is the highest level of conformance. The thing about AAA is we can't always reach that level of conformance due to different constraints, but they're good to have if we can. AA is mid-range, so AA is where we definitely want to be. We want to make sure that we're meeting AA standards, and if it is law, like it is for the United States wants us to meet AA standards. A would be that lowest bare minimum effort for conformance. We want to at the very least do that, but obviously we want to get to the AA. All right, so for my folks who are in the United States, we have something called Section 508 of the Rehabilitations Act. So you may be familiar, maybe not by name, but in concept with Section 504. Section 504 are our physical disability accessibility laws. So when you think of Section 504, you're thinking about things like we need ramps for people with wheelchairs to get into buildings. We need to make sure our door frames are wide enough. As an occupational therapist, what I did was I lived in Section 504 and went to people's homes and businesses and talked with them about how to make their places, right, make them accessible so that people with disabilities, not only in wheelchairs, all kinds of other disabilities can use their spaces. So just like we have those laws, we also have our digital accessibility laws in Section 508. A good way to think about it is we have a physical storefront. Let's say our physical storefront is Target, but we also have a digital storefront, and that would be Target.com, right? So we want to make sure that everyone can use Target.com, and I bring Target.com up because they just got sued a couple of years ago because their website was not accessible. So they were sued for millions of dollars, and so make sure your stuff is accessible. So like I said, this is all about the federal government. Everything that someone can use as digital needs to be accessible. It follows the WCAG 2.0. So right now for the WCAG, we're on 2.1, and we're going to see a lot of those new things that they added for 2.1, but it's the government. We're always behind by a little bit, right? So we're on 2.0, and we're making sure we're at those AA standards. right? So Title III of the 88 mandates all places of public accommodations, right? Every place that we're in, including the web, should have those global standards. All right, why should we care? We're not going to get too deep into why we should care because that would be better seen in some of the previous trainings that I've done, like the web accessibility intro. But we'll talk about it a little bit because I think it is important for those who probably have not seen that stream. Okay, so many different people are using our web pages. 20% of people in general have a disability, whether or not they tell you. And 62% of those disabilities are silent. Silent meaning physically you cannot tell that they have a disability, and verbally these people are not going to tell you that they have one, right? A good example would be me. I don't publicly talk about my disabilities, and I never have. I only recently started talking about them because I'm now doing this, doing a lot of trainings on web accessibility and using myself as an example because it just goes to show just how many people you may think don't have a disability have one. Let's see. So Interplanet Me said, I am new to ALI, but was Target not required to prove minimum A standards before they built the site? Rolls eyes. Listen here, Interplanet Me. I feel you. I wish I could say, yes, they were supposed to do that, but no. In general, in the field, no one is being forced to check for ALI requirements unless they have an accessibility specialist on their team who is leading that charge, which a lot of places don't have, but some do. I think that web accessibility is not like obvious or inherently known. None of us have learned it in school or in boot camps. So a lot of people build their websites and get sued after the fact, which sucks, but that's why we're here, right? To be the arbiters of like, hey, maybe consider this. So yeah, unfortunately, people are just building websites and not really thinking about accessibility. And I can't even be mad at that because we don't think about disabilities in general. All right, so we have cognitive, physical, and sensory disabilities. I think that when we talk about web accessibility, a lot of us are thinking about people who are blind, and that is a big aspect of what we think about, especially when it comes to screen readers. But you have people who have dyslexia who also use screen readers. People who have learning disabilities, they also use screen readers. They also use different software and devices so that they can understand what's on the screen. And you also want to make sure that things are laid out in a way that are easy to understand, not just for people with cognitive delays, but for little, me and you who don't want to look at a jumbled page of words or photos, right? We have people with physical disabilities. Think about people who may have been born with, I don't know, 2 fingers and can't use a mouse for whichever reason. Think about people who broke broke both arms. Oh my gosh, you broke both of your arms. What are you going to do? You may have to use the internet or some type of device in a special way. Then you have people like me with sensory disabilities. We're talking about sensory processing disorder, those who have trouble with sound, sight, taste, vestibular and proprioceptive input. So these are the people we're thinking about where it's like you don't want a bunch of things flashing or moving on your page, things like that. All right. The other thing I like to talk about are permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities. Permanent disabilities are those that don't go away. Temporary could be things like an illness or an injury. What's up, Graham? You're late, but we just started because I am also late, so it's all good. We also have those with situational disabilities. I like to talk about situational disabilities because they happen so often, right? So a situational disability could be I'm outside using my laptop on the beach because I'm digital nomading because I'm awesome. And the glare from the sun causes me not to be able to see my screen correctly. So that's a situational disability in that I really can't see my screen. Or maybe I'm holding a baby in one arm and I'm holding my iPad in the other arm, right? That's situational. I can only use one hand now. So when we think about, or it's too loud wherever I am, I can't hear anything. How am I gonna watch what's on my screen if I don't have captions. Those are what we're thinking about. All right, the other thing we're thinking about are people who are using assistive technology to interact with our web pages. I'm not going to say the most common, but the one we talk about the most are those screen readers. Screen readers are the things that are reading our page to us because we either can't see or we can't read, or there's something going on, or we have visual perceptual issues where, the letters look weird, whatever. Another thing is people may not be using a mouse. Lots of people don't use a mouse. We don't talk about it a lot, but I do because we want to make sure that all of our websites can be used by just using our laptop or computer, just using this. All right. If your website is not able to be used with only a keyboard, that is a critical defect. All right, we talked about all this. So let's get into it. So in order to understand the WCAG principles, we have to understand POUR because WCAG is structured with the POUR principle. So what is the POUR principle? POUR principle is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, right? Timuism said, I've started using my mouse a lot less, and wow, has it been eye-opening. Yeah, so not only those with disabilities don't use a mouse. It was a weird sentence, but people with disabilities are not the only ones who don't use a mouse to navigate. People who, like a lot of coders, a lot of people who are very tech savvy, they are using their keyboard for everything. They rarely touch their mouse and they're really proud about it. So think about them too if you don't want to think about people with disabilities. All right, so we have perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. If you understand these principles, you are in a really good place. So let's get into what these principles are, and then we'll get into the WCAG. All right. So when we're talking about perceivable, we're talking about can we see the page? Do we see what's on the page? Are there, do we understand where everything is? If I can't see, can I hear the information? If I can't hear, can I see the information, right? We're just thinking about different ways to make sure that people can see what's on the page. That's it. So all the WCAG guidelines that start with a 1, that have a 1 in front of them, they're under this principle of perceivable. All right, then we have operable. Operable is asking us, we can see, all right, good, great, we can see, but can we actually operate and use the website, right? So when we're talking about operable, we're thinking, can I use the controls? Can I navigate? Can I click the buttons without using a mouse, right? No mouse here, no mouse, all right? So we're thinking about keyboard accessible. We're thinking about, do I have enough time to use a web page if there's something that has time limits? Can I operate this website without having a freaking seizure because there are stuff flashing all over it? And can I navigate the website correctly? So everything that starts with a 2 in front of it falls under operable. Understandable. Can I understand the page? Can I understand how to get to where I need to get, right? Can I understand that you put WCAG, but you didn't explain what WCAG was? So now I'm like, okay, what is WCAG? I don't know what that is, right? So we're just making sure that things are readable and understandable. The page layout is predictable. We don't have to figure out how to get somewhere. And the input messages that we have are giving users, like for example, form input messages make sense. All right. Lastly, we have robust. So robust is a combination of all of these things, really making sure that everything works reliably for a different amount of users and that they can use the technology that they're using, like a screen reader or different assistive technologies, to access our web pages. Also making sure that we have we're able to use it with different browsers and different screens and things like that. Okay, got it? All right, I think we're ready. All right, so the last part that we need to know is our severity. We have critical. Critical means, and you'll see I have the ones that are critical, I labeled them as critical. If this criteria is not met, if you walk away from this, knowing nothing, I want you to know all of the critical defects. I want you to at least consider them as, okay, if my website can't do this, then this is a barrier for a lot of different people. Okay, so we have high, medium, and low. These are all important, but critical is like, yo, just do that, please. Bare minimum. All right. So we have the first one. So the first one is what I like to talk about a lot, right? We're talking about alternative text alternatives, right? We want to make sure that if we have an image or a graphic on the page, that there is some type of alternative text that goes with it. So if we're talking about HTML, we're making sure that we have that alternative text attribute, that alt attribute, and then the text that goes within those brackets to explain what's on the page. Yeah, so right now we have a meme, and I'm gonna be explaining the memes that are on the page. I may skip some of the memes, but I am thinking about blind users who may be watching this, who may want to know what the memes are. So this is where anyone can kind of like text in on our live chat if you want to, but we have a meme, and I'm not great at this, but so the meme has a little baby. He's holding his fist up, and he looks like he just won something. And the text overlay says arrives home. And then at the bottom, it says music ends as you finish parking. And on the other side, there's a box from that, and it says alt text template. And it's just kind of explaining what I just explained. It says toddler, clenching fist in front of a smug face, overlaid text on top, and then the overlaid text on the bottom. Success, baby. Alternate Gate said that. Yeah, the baby literally looks like he's saying success, baby. All right, so the second one that we're going to talk about is audio only and video only. So if you have something that it has pre-recorded audio, you want to make sure that you're providing an alternative way for people who maybe can't hear that audio. And if you have video only, you want to make sure that you're maybe giving some type of transcription so that people can see and read if they can't hear. Okay? All right. Captions. This is for pre-recorded captions. This is critical, right? We want to make sure that anything that we have that is pre-recorded, that has audio, has those captions. And there is a meme here. All right, so Graham the Devrel says location of text is not important. You should probably not provide that positioning to keep it more succinct. What do you reckon? Right, so I agree. So what Graham is talking about, and this is a really good thing to talk about, is right here on this alternative text example, it says overlaid text on top and then overlaid text on bottom. Personally, I don't add that extra layer of information. I just would put like what's happening and what the text says, because the context of where the text is usually not important. And when we're thinking about when we're thinking about descriptive text, we want to make sure that it is like straight to the point, because people who are using screen readers don't want to hear a paragraph to explain something that could take one sentence. All right. So we have a meme here for the pre-recorded audio. It says, I added captions to make my video accessible. There's a guy, he's standing in a field, and then there's a girl, and she says, but not automatically generated ones, right? And then he's looking like, and then she's looking like, and then and she's like, but not tomato call, he gem her 8-1 right. Just explaining that if you use things with automatic text generation, it's often not right. All right, so we also are thinking about captions, live captions. We want to make sure that all live captions have live audio, have some type of synchronized like caption. That's not always something that we can do, but it is something to think about. All right, and then audio descriptions, we just want to make sure that we have audio descriptions for video content. So video content, audio descriptions, we also want text descriptions and vice versa. All right, so info and relationships. Info and relationships I'm going to spend some time on because this is one of the ones where myself as an auditor, I see this one come up almost every single time. This is programmatically determined, so this is more about how we're coding our websites. So we want to make sure that the information, the structure, and the relationships that are conveyed on the presentation of the page can be understood. So I'm going to give you an example of that. Let's say we have a website that has lists, there's different heading levels, there's just different things all over the page. But as a screen reader user, let's say I'm using a screen reader, the way that I'm navigating the pages usually are going through the headers and making sure like, okay, heading level 1, I know that this is gonna be probably my page title. Heading level 2, this is probably gonna be, all of my subsections. And I know if something says it's a list with some items, I know that there's a list with items. However, if you in your HTML for whichever reason are not tagging your things correctly, so you may have like a list of 5, but the screen reader is just reading out the list as not a list, just reading it as a paragraph, that's kind of confusing. Also, like heading levels, if you mess around with your heading levels or don't make things headings. So for example, you may have info and relationships is one of your heading level 2s and you talk about it. But then when I'm going through your website and the screen reader just reads it as a paragraph without denoting that this is a heading level, then I will be confused. I will just be like, okay, info and relationships is just paragraph. So this is not telling me that a new topic or a new section has started, right? So that's what we're thinking about when it comes to that. I think we were on meaningful sequence and I was trying to show you an example. So here is an example. Let's go over to this one. Let's see what it's looking like. Okay, so an example of meaningful sequence would be, this is pretty straightforward, right? We have everything going down in a line. So an example of that would be if I'm using a screen reader for whichever reason, and I'm going through my, my screen reader is reading all this stuff out. It's saying about, qualifications link, contact link, light mode, dark mode link. And then it'll say heading level 1. Hi, I'm Amber. Then it's going to jump and say, I came to accessibility from a diverse and well-rounded background. And then it'll jump and say, I'm a JavaScript React developer in British Columbia. So that's an example of what we're talking about when we're talking about meaningful sequence. We want to make sure that it is programmatically determined for us that we're going in the right order. You may ask yourself, well, inherently, it should do that anyway, right? Yeah, it should, but sometimes we mess up with our code and we may code it in a certain way that it doesn't do that, and it happens all the time. A good example of this that I don't have a visual for would be if you have text in 2 columns, right? Text in 2 columns, and for some reason, the screen reader is only reading text in 1 column, then going to the next page. So something happened, right? Something happened to where it's not reading or it's skipping over something that would be under this specific guideline. Something to think about. All right, let's move on. Sensory characteristics. This is critical, and this is one I hope that everyone thinks about leaving here. So we should definitely not be using color only to convey something. We shouldn't be using sounds only to convey something, and we shouldn't be using vision only to convey something, right? So let's say we have an alert. I put in my password wrong, and the only thing that happens to show me that I put my password up wrong is it turns red. If I'm colorblind, I'm not really gonna know, right? Or if I put it in wrong and it gives me a ding, 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 ding to alert me that I did something wrong. If I can't hear, I can't see that. You get what I mean. Or if I'm on the page and one of my instructions is to click on the black box or click on the green box. If I can't see color, I won't be able to know what color to click on. So that's just something to think about. Okay, if you see a double star next to any of these, that means it's included on 2.1. It's not included on 2.0. So for those of you watching, because you're trying to do Section 508 trusted tester or something like that, these are not things that would be on that test, and these are not things that the federal government is looking at. However, it is good to know as developers, so I added it. All right, 1.34 is orientation. This just means you need to be coding your websites in a way that is not location dependent. So if you have a page, it should be able to be seen on your laptop in, you know, the horizontal way. If you're on your phone, you should be able to like put it the long way or put it the other way. So if you're designing mobile first, this is covered, right? You're gonna do good. Identify input purpose. We want to make sure that we can have autocorrect on our pages, especially for people with cognitive delays. A lot of my patients that I see, one of the things we utilize, one of the main things we utilize is, auto put in everything, save it so that you don't have to type out everything. So that's really important. A lot of people use that who don't have disabilities, including ourselves, right? All right, use of color, critical. We talked about this already. The one we talked about was general about everything, but this is specifically about color. We want to make sure that if we are using color, there's something else that we're using that explains what's happening, right? So you can see this pie chart. It says, what happens when I tell people I'm colorblind? The pie chart is a circle, a yellow circle, and then it has one slice, a tiny, tiny slice that's blue. Next to it is a blue box, and conveying the color, right? The blue box says that's cool, and then there's a green box under that conveying like the color of the pie chart. It's green, and it says points at the object. What color is this, right? Just kind of showing us that if you use color, like people are, it's not going to be, they're not going to know what's going on. All right, audio control. If any audio on a web page plays automatically for more than 3 seconds, there needs to be something that the user can press using their keyboard to stop it or pause it, right? Remember that. Contrast, minimums. We want to make sure that the contrast ratio for our text or images are at least 4.5 to 1. So this number is not important for you to memorize. What you should do is use a color contrast checker. All right, so I'm going to actually show you the color contrast checker that I use. I have a Mac, so this I believe is only available for Mac. For my other users of PCs and Linux and whatever else, there are a plethora of color checkers that you can use, including color contrast checker. Just Google it and download one. We talk about extensions a lot. So one of the ones that y'all know that I use is the Wave extension. The Wave extension does have a color contrast checker in it. So I'm just gonna give you some examples of checking color contrast really fast because I think it's pretty important. So here's my website. My website is pretty boring in that it's white on black, so we know inherently the color contrast is fine. But if we go to one of my examples, let's say we do the grandpa test one that someone sent me. So we got grandpa test. This is great, right? But we want to know, what do y'all think? Do you think that this text has a good color contrast? Just curious before we check it. So while I check to see if anyone's looking, I'm pulling up the Wave extension. The Wave extension is the web accessibility evaluation tool powered by WebAIM. Lady Blue Note says it's probably not on the transparent part. I agree. Clarita says maybe the top. I think the top could be fine. And then Interplanet Me said things fade into each other. Yeah, so this is probably not going to pass our color contrast checker. So if we're using Wave, they do have this color contrast checker, but my caveat with it is that it doesn't always find color contrast errors. So do not use automated tools to find color contrast. You're gonna have to do them manually. But as you can see, it's kind of telling us that like it looks like it's passing a little bit. So that's why I don't really use it. There's one small that it says like right here is not going to pass, right? Automatically, this is what it's finding. So this is just if we're using automated tools. All right, yeah, that doesn't pass. That seems pretty obvious, but it's not finding all of this stuff, right? This looks like it might not pass. So let's use a real manual contrast checker. So what I like to use is called Contrice because it looks cool, it looks fly, and I'm with it. So this is my color contrast checker. It's really easy to use. I just click on the dropper. All right, I know I want to look at the letters right here, right? And then I'm gonna just check the background next to it. Maybe this. Okay, it does pass on this particular spot, right? But if we maybe take it to over like right here, where the color starts to get a little weird, still passing, probably because I'm not clicking on the right spot. All right, so as you can see, a lot of this area, bam, fail. It fails, and it tells you that it fails in big old letters. So that's why I'm like, download a color contrast checker, guys. It's really easy to use and it's actually kind of fun. So now what I do, because I'm a troll, is I use this color contrast checker like on random websites just to see if it passed because it's fun. So download it. It's a great time. Use it on your websites. You never know. All right, let's move on. Resize text. So we want to make sure that if we resize our pages 200%, nothing weird happens. We can still use it. Okay. That may sound obvious, but some websites, they start crowding, they start being weird if you like resize it. But in general, especially for people with low vision and just like regular people who want to not strain their eyes while they're reading stuff, just make sure you're able to resize 200%. So the next thing we want to do is make sure that images of text are not used where text can convey the same information. So what do I mean by that? I mean, let's see, do I have any examples of that? I don't think I have any like extreme examples right now. But actually I do. So this is an example, but it's not what I'm talking about. So let me answer Clarita's question. She or they said, do you find different browsers will respond differently to resizing to 200? Off the top of my head, me personally, I have not noticed that, but I bet you that there is probably some discrepancies with resizing using different browsers, which is why when we test, we should be testing our pages with like the top 3 most used browsers if we can, right? All right, so an example of having text that is just like a picture of text would be this, right? I have, time for a break with this little bubble, right? This is a decorative image to me, because without this image, right? Without this image, you would still understand what's on the page, right? So this is not really that important to me. However, if I had this as a picture and it just said your stretch break and it was a picture, think about what that would mean for people who are using screen readers or using some type of something to read the page. The screen reader is going to be like graphic, your stretch break, graphic, and then it's going to go to the next thing. And that's just because I'm an accessibility wizard, right? So I'm like, all right, I know that I need I need some type of alternative text on here, right? To show that this is an image and then to explain what it is. But most people don't do that. So they'll have like really important information that is a picture, but then the screen reader doesn't read it. Or if it does, it's like if that's a heading, like it's not going to show up as a heading, right? It's going to show up as a graphic, which is further confusing if it's a heading or something that conveys something important structurally to the page. So in general, if you can, just type it out and style it in CSS however you want it to look if it's important information. Otherwise, you can use pictures of text if it's not important information. So I like to talk about that one because it's really random, but like pretty important. I think it's something that you don't think about. I'll put it that way. All right, reflow. So this is 2.1, not 2.0. So not something that we actually test for, but something that I still think about very heavily. So while we definitely want to make sure that we resize to 200, we want to make sure that we actually can resize to 400. So if I resize to 400, I want to make sure that there is no horizontal scrolling at the bottom. So this is actually something that I worked on for my page because I still had the scroll button when resizing to 400. Y'all, I'm so proud. I'm so proud. You guys don't understand how proud I am of this because I had horizontal rescroll for so long. I don't remember what I did to fix it, but I did. So as you can see, I can resize 400px or whatever it is percent and still scroll through my page without horizontal scroll. And I feel really great about it, okay? Someone give me some props. All right. So let's move on. Ooh, actually, let's see if everyone else can, just for fun. HunterBot, let's see if you can go up to 400. Yep, HunterBot can. All right, this is the Weebly page, so this will be fun to see if this one can go up to 400. Yep, it can, great. Weebly is pretty good with like mobile first type stuff, so. All right. All right, so non-text contrast, this is just about checking contrast on things that are pictures, which doesn't always work, right? Color contrast in general, no one even thinks about it, so you definitely know they're not thinking about it for like non-text graphics. And, you know, I didn't even think about it, I'm not gonna lie, on my own stuff. So who knows if any of this is actually like, the color contrast is okay. But, you know, something to know, something good to think about. All right, so text spacing, we want to make sure that we're able to modify text display properties. Graham said this is for inputs, buttons, X primarily. Wait, are you talking about? Oh, you're talking. Okay, yes. You know what? That's a good point and something that I should have said. So this is talking about. Thank you, Graham. This is talking specifically about buttons and inputs. So, for example, we want to make sure, like if we're talking about, for example, this button, making. I think I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is what we're talking about. Just making sure that buttons and things like that have good contrast so people can see them. I appreciate that. This is why I'm like, I always need someone who's like a whiz with accessibility in the streams with me. All right. Text spacing, this is important even though it's not on the 2.0, it's on 2.1. If you're here with 100 devs, you know that's something that we learned. We want to make sure that we're not hard coding the size of our text into our code. We want to make sure that we're using like M's and REMs so that people who need to resize or are using different technology or software to resize or do something with the text, they're able to do that. If you hard code it, they're not going to be able to do what they need to do, and that kind of sucks. So content on hover or focus, this is just talking about if we have something where when if I'm hovering over it, I should be able to easily dismiss that. Okay, so now we're on number two. Number two, if you all remember, number one was all about what we can see on the page, making sure we can see it, right? So everything that falls under a number two in front of it is about operability. So now that we know we can see the page, we need to make sure we can actually use the page. And I just want to be explicit about this. This has a lot to do with whether or not we can use our pages with a keyboard, okay? So the first one talks about, and this is critical, it talks about being able to use the interface with only the keyboard. Okay, so Graham has clarified something, and I appreciate it. I'm not gonna lie, the ones with the double stars by them, I may be a little bit off with what I'm telling you they're about. I know them very, very generally, but they're not something that I do day to day for my job. So I kind of just know them as I see or read about them. But Graham said 1.4.12 is about line height. So the minimum should be 1.5 and 1. Okay, so it's about line height and spacing of paragraphs. All right, cool. So specifically line height and spacing of paragraphs. We love it. Appreciate it. All right, so making sure everything is accessible by keyboard interface only. Let's do some testing. We're gonna test really fast. And we're gonna test on purpose because I wanna show you something that happens if you use a radio button. Okay, so this is my radio button. This is my hamburger menu, not radio button. Okay, so we have my page. For me to test whether or not something is navigable by keyboard, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna like put this down so you can kind of see my hands and what I'm doing, since I don't have an extra camera. So if I wanna navigate, typically I'm gonna use my up and down arrows, and let me make sure I can actually see on here. So typically I do want to use my up and down arrows, and I want to use my tab button. So the first thing that I usually do is I tab. So as you can see, here goes my finger. Here goes the tab button. And I'm just tabbing to see and make sure that I can use everything, right? So looks like, okay, cool. I can tab everything that needs to be tabbed. Wonderful. But let's see what happens when I make this to where my hamburger menu pops up, because this is mobile, right? So can I tab through everything? Okay. The answer is no, I can't tab through everything. I can't tab through my hamburger menu. Okay. If you've been here with me before, y'all already know how I feel about hamburger menus. They are the bane of my existence, because unless you're using like a specific framework, by the way, this is all vanilla JavaScript. Don't make fun of me, but that's what this is. Maybe one day I'll change it to React when I get around to it. But for now, it's vanilla. So I hard coded my hamburger menu, and many people may hard code their hamburger menus, but they're not inherently accessible. You need to go in and change something with the JavaScript and whatever else to make sure that you can get into it. So something to think about. Not accessible. One of these streams, I'm going to be specifically streaming me building the hamburger menu accessibly. But till then, my bad. But also note that my website is still under construction, so it's not actually being used by people, hopefully not. All right, so the other thing we want to think about is keyboard traps. So this happens a lot whenever I do audits. What will happen is you may be tabbing through a website and then you get trapped in a circle. So let's go to someone's website so I can kind of give you an example of that. And let's see, which one haven't I done? I want one that has a lot of links. All right, I think Nell's in here with me, so I'm going to use hers as an example. Let's see if she has enough links for me to do that. Not really. I'll use it for an example for something else. Okay, so let's say, for example, I want to use this website, right? And for some reason, I'm getting trapped, and this is not actually happening. I'm just making this happen. But for some reason, I'm getting trapped between these four things, right? I'm going in a loop. I cannot get out of this loop. I'm stuck here. That's the keyboard trap. And for some reason, it happens a lot. All right, character key shortcuts. So this is another double star, which means it's on 2.1, not 2.0. Basically, we want to make sure that if we have any shortcuts, they're able to be turned off or remapped or active only on focus. So this one, I'm not going to lie, I'm not that familiar with. So if Graham knows more about it, he can tell us. But my understanding of it is if there are any shortcuts on the page, we want to make sure that people are not activating it by accident. Timing adjustable, this one's pretty important, so we'll talk about it a little bit. Timing adjustable just means if you have any time controls, we're thinking about how we're presenting those time controls, especially for people who have lowered cognitive abilities or have injuries or tremors or move really slowly due to some type of physical impairment. So let's say, for example, we're on a page. If you're idle on this page for more than a minute, something pops up and lets us know that our page is going to log us out, probably because there is some sensitive information on the page. So we want to make sure that when this does pop up, we're able to turn off the time limit or restart it in some way. We want to make sure that this time limit, we're giving this notification and they have at least 20 seconds to extend their session without losing the data. And you should be able to extend at least 10 times. So for a lot of us, this seems like really simple because all we have to do is click something really fast and then it redoes it. But we're not really thinking about all the people I just talked about who may have slower reaction times, okay? So Graham is hooking us up with some character key shortcut information. He says, yeah, so say you set a shortcut of the key 2 to access something on the page. That would interfere with the screen reader as they would use 2 to access heading level 2s. So you need to be able to switch shortcuts off or change them to stop collision with assistive tech. Thank you, Graham. We love you. Interplanet Me says, banking apps and Social Security Administration are the worst for that. Yes. Guess what I'm testing all day, y'all? I'm testing government, so stuff like that, where you're inputting things like your Social Security and all that stuff. And time again, when it comes to these limits, they are so inaccessible that it's infuriating. But it's all good. What can I do other than audit them and tell them, please fix it? All right. So Clarita said, I choose to buy concert tickets from a site that did not set a countdown menu like most. So stressing. Oh my gosh, that sounds stressful. Sorry to hear that. All right. Pause, stop, hide. So this is critical. We talked about it a little bit, but in general, anything that moves, blinks, scrolls, or auto updates needs to have an input that you can use with your keyboard that pauses these things. All right, so 3 flashes or below. So if something flashes more than 3 times per second, that is the perfect recipe for someone who may have seizures to have one. So we are definitely thinking about that. Just don't do it. Remove it. We don't even want a stop, like a pause button. We just don't want it. All right, and on here is a meme. There's a picture of a woman in a kitchen. She looks like an older woman, and it says, oh, isn't epilepsy that condition where flashing lights trigger it? And then she's like, yes and no. So I think she's saying yes and no because not only flashing lights are the things that start it, but it is one of the things. So we want to make sure that we're not adding that to our pages. All right, so we want to make sure that there's a mechanism to bypass big blocks of content that are repeated on multiple pages. So I wish that I had the foresight to pull up a website that does this, because there are a lot of good websites that'll kind of do that. And I'm kind of curious to see if, like, let's go to the va.gov, for example. va.gov, if I am tabbing through va.gov, they have this beautiful button right here that says skip to content. So if I click it, it'll take me straight to where I need to go, bypassing. So let's say I didn't click on that. Let me show you what I would have to go through. I gotta go through a lot, right? Annoying. That's why we want those bypass blocks. So the bypass blocks are mostly for people who have content that's just repeating and that you have to go through a bunch of stuff. So we don't think about keyboard users because it is what it is. We don't. A lot of us are using our trusty mouse, right? But people who use a keyboard, tabbing through all that stuff, oh my gosh. As someone who has to do manual testing all day, it's like really annoying. So if you have something like that where there are a bunch of things that are showing up, oh, listen, Graham, I know. He said, haha, you have showed that the page has an accessibility error as a dropdown should auto close if you tab outside of it. Yes. I'm going to tell you guys a secret. It's not a secret, but like I'm going to tell you, only 1% of the VA is accessible, like their websites. It's crazy. That's a real statistic, y'all. 1%. All right. Page title. All right, we want to make sure that page titles have helpful and clear page titles that describe the purpose. This feels obvious, but like is often something that doesn't happen. Okay. Focus order. Focus order is pretty important. I'll give you an example of this. So if I'm tabbing with my keyboard, right? Let's go to this one. No, we already did this one. Let's say I'm trying to do the grandpa test, right? This one doesn't have enough for it to make it worth it. I'm trying to find something that has like a lot on their page. Well, just to make it fast, because we don't need to elaborate that much on this, but let's say I'm tabbing through, but when I tab, it's just jumping all over the page. It's not tabbing in the order that things are showing up. That's all we're talking about with tabbing order, with focus order, my apologies. So the focus, when we're talking about focus, we're talking about the rings that show up, right, when you're trying to select something. So if the rings are just going all over the page because there's no tab index or no way for us to do that, yeah, that's not helpful for anybody who's trying to use our stuff, right? All right, link purpose, link purpose, link purpose in context. This one shows up a lot too. We want to make sure that if we do have a link, the link doesn't just say click here. The link tells us where we're going. So that either means the link is an actual web address, HTTP, blah, 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 right? Or better yet, if we're trying to take someone to a bookstore, the link says bookstore. Like now we know we're going somewhere, right? Rather than just click here, which could mean anything, okay? The other reason we want to do that, other than visually just knowing where things go, some people tab through just to the links or just tab using the tab button, which takes you to like the selectable components. And if they tab and all they hear is like click here, then they're not going to know where they're going. Pointer gestures, this may be one that Graham is going to elaborate on for us, but my understanding of it is if you have something that is like a gesture, if you're doing something like maybe like touching or using your mouse in a certain way, like moving it, you want to make sure that there's just an easy way to click or select, because someone may not be using a mouse to do those gestures, and they may not be able to use their hand to also do these complex gestures that you have on your page. All right, so pointer cancellation, this helps people with tremors or mobility impairments. We want to make sure that you're able to kind of, this one's kind of hard for me to explain, but it's for things like drag and drop, where, for example, you may not be able to sustain that the click long enough to drag your thing where you need it to go. And this kind of just is a stopgap to make sure no one's activating something by accident by double clicking or by letting something go. So we're thinking about maybe like using things that will give you a way to undo your click, etc. Graham also said that we need alternatives for multi-touch gestures, so things like pinch and zoom, because we may not be able to pinch or zoom, right? We may not have that fine motor control. Like, I'm cognitively all the way here. I understand we need to drag and drop or pinch and zoom, but I may not have the capability to do that. Okay. So label and name. This is for inputs. So when we're thinking about like labels and then the input that go with them, they should be matching. So if I have a label and the label is for an address, and this is also something that I could like be slightly wrong about, would dragging and dropping on GitHub be a good example? I'm trying to remember what do you drag and drop on GitHub? You can elaborate on that, but maybe, probably. I don't remember dragging and dropping on GitHub myself, but I'm not sure now. Yeah, so make sure you have accessible names and they match the visible label. So for example, if you have that input and you have the label, they're matching. One says address, the other one says address. This is so if we have a screen reader, the screen reader is correctly reading what needs to go in there. Motion actuation. Actually, I'm not really familiar with this one. Alternative, just because you're a cool CLI user. I use the terminal for GitHub. All right, motion actuation. I won't elaborate on this one. Multiple ways. This one's a good one to know. We want to make sure that there's more than one way to locate something in a page. So you may have a search bar if you have like a very big page that has a lot of information for people to find things, but we don't only want there to be a search bar. We also want there to be some type of table of contents, a site map, or a navigational bar where we can easily get where we need to go. Headings and labels, we absolutely want to make sure that the headings that we use and the labels we use within our pages actually describe the topic and the purpose of the page. Focus visible, we talked about this. So that focus ring that you see whenever I'm tabbing through the page needs to be visible. If there is no focus ring, if I'm just tabbing through all willy-nilly, how am I going to know where I am on the page, right? If there's nothing to show me that I'm on it, then visually I will not know that I'm on it. So making sure that the focus ring is visible and clear is important. Okay, so now we've made it to 3. Okay, so let's go back to 2.5, 2.4. Motion actuation 2.54. So Graham is helping us up. He said it's all about shaking the phone to refresh, for example, or tilting. There needs to be an alternative way to perform that action. So I know for some of this is like usually for phones. Sometimes you can shake things and it'll clear it, or you can, tilt or whatever. So thank you, Graham. Okay, so now we're on 3. Does anybody remember what 3 in the POUR method, the POUR principles, gives us? Like, what are we focused on when it comes to everything that has a 3 in front of it? So we know number 1 was perceiving. Number 2 is operating with the keyboard usually. And number 3, alternative gate. Yes, it's understand. So we want to make sure that everything is understandable for number 3. This just means, do we understand what's on the page? Yes. Oh, look at y'all. Understandable, yes. Interplanet, me and Clarita. And Control Alt Tree, yes. Understandable. All right, language of page. We want to make sure that the language is programmatically determined at the top. So if we're doing HTML, for example, usually we can like put in English, or we can put in French, or whatever it is that we're doing, right? This is for the whole entire page. We want to make sure that it's determined, especially for our screen reader users, because the screen reader is going to read in a default, but like if your page is written in French, you want to make sure that it's actually read in French and not in a weird way from the screen reader. So language of parts is specific. So we have language of a whole, which is the whole page. Language of parts is just talking about, all right, let's say I have an excerpt and my excerpt is in Spanish, but the rest of the page is in English. We want to make sure that we programmatically determine that this is in Spanish. All right, on focus. So on focus is critical. This just means we don't want elements to change when they receive focus. So for example, if I am on my stretch break, right, and I'm tabbing through and I hit start and then it starts. I didn't want it to do that. I was just trying to tab through, homie. You feel me? So we want to make sure that if we're just like, or if I just, put my thing right here, right? We can see that nothing's happening, but sometimes for some reason, there may be an issue where you're hovering over something or you're selecting something like this, and then it actually starts doing something. All right, so 3.22 is on input. So we want to make sure that this is true. A change of context is not initiated simply by an input receiving focus like we talked about. And so Interplanet Me says, so you want to be able to double tap. Yeah, you should be able to double tap. I think this is mostly talking about if we happen to be hovering over something, or just like, like we tab to it, it doesn't just select it, essentially. Okay. So also, if we have an input that receives focus and does initiate a change of context, the user should know that's going to happen. So like if you're playing a game, sometimes going, doing something to the game or hovering over something may happen, but we don't want something to happen to where it's like literally going to change the screen to something else, essentially. All right, consistent navigation. This is talking about just placing things consistently on your page. For example, if I go to, we got to pick somebody who has like a big page. If I go to this page, right, and I click fame, when I click fame, everything is still the same, right? I click all, maybe not. Oh no, that goes somewhere else, which is interesting. If I click fun, right? Everything is staying the same. I know where to go. There's nothing changing up here. If I go to the bottom, there's nothing really, everything looks the same. So that makes it easy for me to navigate. And as like you know, we are modern users of the internet. Our brain is already set up to understand that that's how a page should flow. So if you deviate from that, you're going to just annoy everyone, including people with cognitive delays. The same thing goes for icons and buttons. If you're going to use a certain style, keep the style the same throughout. If you change colors or change style, it kind of is confusing because it may make the user think like it will do something differently. It's much nicer when you keep everything consistent. All right, so error identification, we want to clearly identify input errors. Okay, so identifying input errors are important because we want to make sure people know that they have made an error and they can change those errors. This is critical and often something that we don't really think about. Clearly identifying input errors has to do with being explicit in telling the user what they need to change. So it's not just like error and you're like, okay, so like what did I do wrong? It's like, oh, you put in your social security number. This needs to have 7 digits or however many digits security numbers have, right? Labels or instructions. This is also critical. We want to make sure that there is instruction provided when content requires user inputs. So let's say we go to, I don't know, I don't have a good example of this, but like off the top of my head. But a good example to tell you about verbally would be, let's say you're putting in your address, your name, your number, right? We want to make sure that the labels say like phone number, and then maybe it'll have like the digits, like for example, number, right? Number. And then XXX, XXX, XXXX, right? I think that's how numbers go. And then maybe we'd have, we're going to pretend that this is a form where we would put our number, 954-226, blah, 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 blah. Now you know the first 6 digits of my number. Oops. But, right? Explicit. We understand what's happening here. Why? Should be obvious that we need this amount of numbers, but it may not be obvious to someone with cognitive delays. Okay? Okay, so error suggestions, we want to make sure that we actually give the appropriate suggestions for errors like we talked about before. So some of these, they seem like they may be the same, but really one is a more general idea, and this is really being explicit, like our errors need to have the right suggestions, right? So if we have an error, it's telling us what we did wrong. Okay, so this is the same thing. So yeah, it's reducing risk of input errors for sensitive data. So you don't want someone to put in the wrong thing and not know how to change it, essentially. Okay, so error prevention, this is for legal financial data. This is critical. So this is we talked about this a little bit, but we're gonna talk about it explicitly. This is talking specifically about form submissions. So if we have a form where we're putting in all of this legal data, we want to make sure that once we put in our data, we can also revise the data. So even though we submitted it, we are still able to change things. So a good example of this would be if we're doing a job application, right? So if we're doing a job application, we put in like a ton of information, a ton, right? And once we submit, usually if the person has some sense or, is thinking about us, we're making sure that like it shows us, this is all the information that you've given me and you're reviewing it. Is this correct, right? Is it correct? If so, now you can submit it. If not, you can go back and revise it, right? So you're always giving users, you're checking for input errors, and then you're giving the user some opportunity to correct them. So you need to be able to review, confirm, and correct, specifically for legal financial data. Okay? All right, Graham, it was good to see you. We will definitely be streaming together at some point. Love it. Hit me up. All right, Graham's gone, guys, so if I say something wrong, oops. But no, I think the rest of these I know pretty well. All right, parsing. Okay, let's talk about parsing. Parsing! I heard that through the grapevine, they're going to get rid of this one. And I have some feelings about it. I would love to hear what other people have feelings about this about. Too bad Graham's about to leave. But this is all about having no major code errors. So this is specifically about our code and what happens when, oh, thank you, Alternative Gate. We did change sections. So we went from the 3s to the 4s. Can someone tell me what the 4s are? Like what are we doing here? What are we paying attention to in our poor method? So we know 1 is perceivable, 2 is operable, 3 is understandable, and control, alt gate, the closed horse, interplanet me, Clarita. Yes, it's robust. Woo, we did it. Robust. And robust just means we can use the page, we can operate it, we can use it with different devices, the information we're getting is correct, right? So when it comes to parsing, we want no major code errors. So a good example of a code error would be if I am on a page and there's a list of 4 items in bullets, right? And when I'm using a screen reader, for some reason, the screen reader reads that list of items as 6 items. That's super confusing. I don't know why it says 6 when there's only 4. That's going to confuse me. So basically it's just looking at, like, if I'm using something to tell me what's on the page, my assistive technology should be able to read it correctly. If not, that's a parsing issue, an issue with how we coded the page. So name, role, and value. This is a lot about ARIA. We're not going to get into ARIA because that's its own separate stream that we're going to do at some point. But essentially, ARIA extends HTML and it's used mostly for components that are interactive. So it's used for things like forms, where if we click something, something's submitted or something happens to the page. It just gives the user of assistive technology extra information that guides them in understanding what's on the page, right? So we want to make sure if we're using that the name and the role and the state, right? What state is it? What role? What is the name? What's the value? How many of them? We want to make sure that that is programmatically understood and determined so that when the screen reader reads whatever this label is, it's correct. And that often is not a thing that happens. And a good example of that could be something like, let's say you have a form or something, and when you press submit, something changes, but the screen reader doesn't read that something's changed. So you're just like, okay, I don't know what just happened. Status messages. We want to make sure that we provide status messages programmatically. Okay, so the rest of these are not, we've reached the end of WCAG specifically. There are 3 things that we're going to go over really fast. These are specific to Section 508, American, the Rehabilitative Act. So a lot of y'all who follow me are interested in Section 508, so I added these because these are things that I also test for and keep in mind when at work. So these are just examples or extensions of what we talked about already. So they're good to just remember as a send-off. In general, we want to make sure that people with limited vision can use our stuff. We also want to make sure that assistive technology can be used with our web pages or with our documents or whatever we're using. So we want to make sure that there is some type of built-in accessibility feature that allows that to happen. And lastly, we want to make sure that any type of documentation, whether that be web-based or a Word document, conforms to level A and level AA of the WCAG. So we talked about that already as well. So guess what? Oh my goodness, we did it. 3 hours later or 2 hours later, we finished and went through all of the major accessibility guidelines of the WCAG. So I'm really proud of y'all if you stayed here for this whole time, because that was a lot. And thank you for hanging out. What we're going to do now is we're going to take some time to go over questions. I'm going to change my screen a little bit. But yeah, that is the WCAG. I promise you, if you have sat through this entire presentation, you now have the keys to the accessibility, whatever you want to call it. you know like 80% more than the average web developer or designer if you've gone through this. I think that a lot of the WCAG is you just need to hear it once just to get a general idea of what to consider. If you want to go further and start studying the WCAG, one of the things that I did to really get to the point where I can talk a little bit more confidently about it is I did 100 Days of ALI. I talk about that sometimes. 100 Days of ALI is pretty much just a hashtag on Twitter or wherever you want to do it, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever the kids are using these days. And you just go through each guideline one by one and tweet it out. I did that for 100 days going through all of them, and that's how I learned it primarily, just by like taking a day to go through one and read about it and just do that. So that's something you can do if you really want to learn more and make it a gamified thing. Especially because the WCAG, if you go to like the W3C and you go to the actual page with all the guidelines, it's dry. It's dry, y'all. So I was hopeful that like if I did a stream, it would be fun and people would be able to learn it a little bit more easier. Okay, so I'm gonna look through some of these questions. Please send me questions and we'll take some time to just hang out and answer them. If you've got to go, it was great hanging out with you. For everyone else, I'm going to just answer some questions. Tech NFA, first time in the chat. You're welcome. Okay, so Interplanet Me said, agreed, you using your own words to describe WCAG changed how I look at the WCAG now. Yeah, you know what? Thank you, because it's so dry but it's not like hard to understand. I think if you're already a coder and you're already coding, like just going through like what to consider is really helpful, especially because no one's really talking about it. And there's so many barriers to all of these people that I see daily and work with, and myself. So I'm really excited about like anyone who can sit through this and really learn it. So I appreciate y'all for being here. Control Alt Tree said, this was helpful. Sometimes the WCAG language on their website is hard to understand. I agree. It's pretty hard to understand because it's super dry. And I learned it by doing and having to do a bunch of audits all day. All right, so Interplanet Me also said, if we need more examples of what each WCAG looks like, how can we do that? Your examples were very on point. So if you need examples, so actually what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put in the chat the link for the WCGA. Hit me up on Twitter. I'll see y'all later. Thank you so much. It was a great time. Bye, everybody. Yes, thanks for having me. Thank you, y'all.